All right, guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we have a very special guest with us, John Lees, and he is a comic book writer, and it is October. So I picked a comic book writer that I read the most right now for Halloween. I love spooky stuff. I love terrible horror things that we're going to get into. And this is, you're pretty new to writing. I mean, a few years now, but not 10, 50, 20 years writing. And you've
Feels like 100 years.
for how long it takes to get there. But the work, and we're going to get into it, guys. I will show as we're talking pictures of his work, is definitely horror. If you love horror, this is the video you should be watching. And I'll let John kind of tell some of his stuff and where he comes from and how he became a writer and all that we'll get to, but I'll let him introduce himself.
Okay. Hi, I'm John Lees. I am a comic book writer based out of Glasgow, Scotland. I've been working for about the past decade now. My most probably high profile or most well-known books are, I did a comic called Sink, which I can see in the background there on your bookshelf.
My favorite.
Which is a kind of hard-boiled, horror crime saga set in this district called Sink Hill, which is this nightmarish forgotten area of Glasgow. Obviously it's kind of my love letter to like my home city in a kind of twisted way. Although I'm not sure the Glasgow Board of Tourism is too keen on it. But other than that, the other comic that I did with a Scottish theme that was my first kind of breakout book, which kind of first probably got me noticed, was a comic called And Then Emily Was Gone, which I did with Ian Laurie, which is a kind of Twin Peaks in the Scottish Highlands type book, kind of creepy horror with kind of missing children and folklore and terrifying monsters. More recently, other books I've had have included Mountainhead, which is a kind of sort of psychological thriller set out in the Rocky Mountains. I did that with Ryan Lee for IDW, and I most recently had a book called Hotell come out through AWA, which is a kind of horror anthology set in an old roadside hotel off Route 66, where people go and are confronted with various terrifying stories.
Awesome. And with these works, I really want to get into it because you've written a few series now. When I first read you, it was those two. Emily is Gone. Is that it?
And then Emily Was Gone.
And then Sink. And those were how I got into your work a few years ago. Really enjoyed them. But now you have a few series out that you've written. And I feel like it's a great question for people who want to get into new writers. What would you suggest as the person who written them? What would you suggest would be the first one to give someone to get your kind of style of writing and storytelling?
Obviously buy all of them because I want as much of your money as possible. No. I don't know, like obviously it's a difficult question because different books are going to be tailored to different tastes. Obviously I worked mostly in horror, but I did a superhero comic coming out. My first one was called The Standard, so if that's more your cup of tea, maybe you'll like that. But if I was to give a broad answer, I'd probably still say that like the kind of ultimate intro to John Lees is probably Sink, because it's so close to my heart. It's set in my hometown, it's a kind of like mixing pot of various stories I've had in my head for years that I finally found an avenue to tell them in. But that's the great thing about Sink, is that because it's an anthology series as well, it's a bunch of standalone tales that kind of connect with a shared location. It means that you have the freedom to tell all kinds of different stories under the umbrella of Sink. So there's some horror stories in there, there's some action stories in there, there's a romantic comedy issue in there. You can do all kinds of things you want to do, all under the umbrella of Sink. So I'd still say, and also that's my longest running series so far. It's 10 issues with the next 10 written and a kind of extra one coming up, so I was in terms of my signature series, that's probably the best bet, because there's so much of it, and also as I say, because it seems so close to my heart, and it's me working with my artist life partner Alex Cormack,
He's so good.
I've done a million things with, and I'm planning to do a million more with, so I say that's a good bet. However, having said that, I'd say Mountainhead is also a good shout because, like I say, it's from IDW, which is probably the biggest publisher I've worked with so far, and the production values and Ryan Lee's art, it just looks like such, a stunning, book. Like, it's like one of these things where, like, even as I was getting the pages in, I was like, every one of these pages you could put up on your wall, like, it looks like it's a work of art.
Yeah.
And like, even Sean Lee, who's the letterer, did the design on the book. So the actual book is an artifact itself, which is like a marvel of design, the whole trade dress and everything, like, and I think like that. I think if you picked up Mountainhead, also it's different from Sync, because while Sync's a kind of anthology / ongoing thing, Mountainhead's a self-contained story. It's like 5-issue miniseries. You get one big story and it's done. And so yeah, like, I think you'd probably get your money's worth. But to be honest, whatever you pick up, either it's like, Hotell or Oxymoron or whatever you grab, like, I feel I'd like to say that I've never slacked off in anything that I've worked on, anything that I've done. Like, I've always liked to say, it's a cheesy saying, but I've always said that, like, I always want everything I work on to conceivably possibly be someone's favorite comic. So like, or like maybe it's someone's first comic even, like, so I don't want to ever just pump something out just to do it. So if you pick up something that has my name on it, that I put a lot of love and effort into it, and it's something I do care about, I do think you'll enjoy. So that would be my kind of cop-out answer.
Yeah, no, I and if I were to recommend, that's the one I usually recommend when people ask me like a good horror sync. Actually, that year that it came out, that was my indie comic of the year, and as you could see, I read quite a bit, and I was blown away. I felt like when I read it, it was not only did it connect to me, but like you said, it's individual stories. So issue like 2 and 4 particularly like really stuck with me, especially issue 4, very Stephen King like, and growing up reading it and things like that, when I read this I was like, this is comic Stephen King that I'm reading right now, and it got me just so excited to talk about it. And ever since then I've always kind of pushed Sync for it's funny, Ice Cream Man, another great comic that comes out, very similar vibe. So when people are like, oh, I love Ice Cream Man, I'm like, did you read Sync though too? It's just like, it's great. Like, it's anthologies are great for horror.
No, it's a perfect fit, because it's like, one, it's like there's the variety of it, there's a chance to kind of, like, horror's built on the unknown, so there's always a chance to do something new and something like, but also it means that nothing's guaranteed. You can be reading a story like in the main, there's no guarantee that the main character is going to survive to the end of the issue, because it's like an anthology thing, so it adds a little extra frisson of tension.
Yeah, and I agree with when you said Hotell is another one I probably would suggest, again, anthology. And if you don't like one story, that's okay, because you got another issue
coming along.
Yeah, and that's kind of what happened with Hotell for me, is one of the stories didn't really connect with me, but the next one, that one in like the AC units or the vents, that was a lot. I was like, oh god. So I really love anthology, but that kind of brings me to my next question, because you have anthology and then you have Mountainhead, which is kind of a single story. When you were growing up and wanting to write comics, what kind of got you into the comics? Like, what did you watch or read that got you into it? And then what kind of, maybe what you're reading now is like inspiring you to write something different or new?
I'll ask like a couple of my multi-part questions. I'll try and tackle it, get a bit at a time. But first thing off, in terms of like how I get into writing comics, I always loved writing. Like, I was writing like since I was a wee kid, and since I did barely knew how to write. Like, I think I said in a recent podcast that I was doing, like, I'd said that, like, when I was like a little kid and I was thinking, like, what do I want to be when I grow up? Like, I remember like my 3 answers that I gave you were always actor, toy maker, and
toy
writer.
Maker. That's just a weird one in there, toy maker.
I wanted to, and like, so the acting and the toy making didn't pan out, but like the writing, like stuck on. But like, so ever since I was a young age, I imagined that I'd be doing some kind of writing. Like, I was thinking maybe I was going to be writing books or whatever. And also from a young age, I always loved superheroes and comics, but I never really put the two together. Like, all comics is something that somebody writes, There wasn't actually until it was actually like, would have been about late 2008. It was like a friend of mine who was an artist asked me, and maybe like, at the time before I was in like the comic scene and anything like this, like, he was the only person I knew like in person, like also like comics, people lend each other comics and stuff. And he's like, I want to do a comic, but I can't really write. So if you write something, can I draw it? And so I went, sure, I'll do a little bit of like studying how you like write comics. So I kind of read up a lot about the format of writing and stuff, and I kind of fell in love with the whole format once I got into it. It's something that you write in terms of like I love the limitations of it, actually, which is a weird thing to say. I love the structure of it and how you're working within certain bounds. And also, it's a kind of relatively new medium. There's a kind of still room to kind of push the envelope and do things that haven't been done before. As it turned out, that first comic that I wrote was the standard, which was totally different from what my friend wanted to do. Like, he's like, well, I can't draw this, but it's really good, so good luck with that. Like, but like, and the rest was history. Like, I've been writing ever since. In terms of like comics that kind of like inspired me, again, it's difficult because like I was a fan of comics for years before like the thought occurred to me of like, I could write these,
Yeah.
But in terms of like books where I really became early comics where I really became aware of like the craft of like writing, like I remember like reading The Killing Joke, like 2005 would have been, and thinking that was one of my earliest examples of not just like experiencing a story or like, this looks good, or like just like getting into the characters, but actually thinking, oh, I can see the craft and how this is written. That was a big example of that. In terms other books like All Star Superman was another one. But I remember I had a major experience once I started making comics or working towards making comics. I read Uzumaki by Junji Ito, which I can also see in the background in your shelf there. And that blew my mind. Like, I remember at the time I was writing a column for a site called Project Fanboy, called Comic Book Club, but I did various essays. And the theme for that month or whatever it was horror comics. And the argument I was spanning was like, can horror be scary in the comics medium? And I was working through the argument in my own head when I was writing it, and someone recommended Uzumaki, which I'd never heard of, so I picked it up, and like I think, a comic about a town haunted by spirals. How scary is that going to be? And like it scared the shit out of me, if I'm allowed to swear,
Oh,
But
yeah.
I thought, and like literally, like in the way, like it uses the comics medium in terms of like building to the page turn. You don't want to turn the page, but you have to turn the page, and then you turn the page like, and it's something horrific, I kind of feel that I've spent like the subsequent decade or so since first reading Uzumaki, I've spent that decade just like trying to chase what Junji Ito is doing and not getting there, that's I kind of feel like
the amount of books he puts out, I don't think anybody's, I don't even think I have them all still. And he comes out like two every month.
I mean, Junji Ito is like the master, like, and if I can like, I've thought if I can like, make someone else feel the way like that I feel like whenever I read his best stuff, like then I'd be laughing. So yeah, like, and I think Junji just in general in terms of his whole model, obviously it's different because he works in manga rather than like the Western comics industry, but I just love that whole model of like short story collections and things like this, and like I think, and if you actually kind of look at it, like obviously it's not quite the same because they're all connected, but Hotell and Sync are kind of somewhat not too far away model in terms of like short story collections versus anthologies, so I can definitely see the influence of like Junji Ito in that sense. In terms of like, what else I want to work on or what else has been inspiring me, like, over the past year, like thanks to lockdown, pretty much my friends got me into reading the work of Naoki Urasawa. And I'd never even heard of him before, never mind like read him, like until like summer of 2020. And at the time, like maybe I've seen like my newsletter, which I do. I was putting together and I was prepping like a top 100 comics series. Like I was going to write a big, list of the top 100 comics. And I had the list pretty decently firmly sorted out. But after getting into Naoki Urasawa, I totally screwed up my list. Now, like 3 of the books in my top 10 are like Urasawa books. Like, like there's like 20th Century Boys, Monster, and Pluto. And just obviously it's different because like with manga, you have a lot more space to work with than you do like in like a 5-issue miniseries. But just the way he builds character, the way he kind of like uses emotion in the page, I found that really aspirational and like really inspirational. And I think that probably like I imagine like the next raft of pitches that I do in future will probably have like heavily like Urasawa influence in them. So he's definitely been a big inspiration. But other than that, like I think you mentioned like is there anything else I'd want to work on? Like obviously like I have ideas like like I say of writing in prose or like working on like scripts at some point, doing like, because I did like film and TV, I did like like script writing like at university, like so I'd definitely be interested in playing with that at some point in the future. But really I kind of feel like right now my focus is on comics. Like I still feel like I have a lot more to do in comics, and there's like things that I haven't done that I want to do, so that's very much my focus for the time being.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, if you could write something as good as Monster, I would I would love that. That really kind of changed for me. I read that when I was really young, around 16, and I read it again last year during lockdown, and that ending still sticks with me. But yeah, something like that. It's a good point because that's such a two opposite. The one who writes Monster writes an extremely long series, and he'll write like 10 pages and it'll scare you. It's amazing
Yeah.
how they're able to do that. But yeah, so that I think having inspirations like that, I can see it, especially now that you mentioned that you read that before you started writing a lot. I can see it now with the short stories. So with all the comic talk, we're still in October. It's a great month for being scared. And so I want to move away from comics for a second, and it's Halloween almost. So what are you watching any good horror movies lately? New ones, old ones, rewatches, never watched and now watching years later, anything like that?
Well, when you're talking about Halloween, obviously you have to mention the big one, Halloween, which every year without fail, the one constant tradition I have is on Halloween, October 31st, I watch John Carpenter's
And but
1978 masterpiece Halloween. I've been watching it so long that literally I was watching on VHS, and then I graduated to DVD, and a couple of years ago I graduated to Blu-ray. Right? That's how long I've been doing this for, 20 plus years or something. I mean, I'm still not sick of it. I still love that movie and still
oh,
find
it's
new
great.
things to love about it. So that's one of my favorite movies. And obviously, in terms of like horror movies that are my favorites, like obviously Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Shining, like they're among my all-time favorite movies. And I'm not sure that if you'd strictly count them as horror, but like Jaws, The Silence of the Lambs, like Alien, they're all one of my favorite movies as
Yeah.
well. In terms of like this year specifically, because every year I like to try like and watch as much horror over the course of October as I can.
Yep.
And sometimes I have themes. Like a couple of years ago, I did like the video nasties. I'm not sure if you've heard of like here in the UK. Back in like the 1880s, I was about to say the 1980s. But back in the good old days when I was a boy in the 1880s. No, but in the 1980s, going into the 1990s, even when I was a kid, the British Board of Film Classification, like due to pressure from like right-wing campaigners, like and moral, censors and this stuff, like put together this list of movies that were banned. And if you had, and the video shop owners like had these videos, they would be like prosecuted for obscenity charges. And I had like, so there's this list, and the funny thing is that it's probably backfired in terms of like the wider scale of history, because what's actually happened is they put together this list of movies to be banned, and now what's essentially done is create this canon of movies, a lot of them which would have been forgotten otherwise, which now became like these legendary movies.
Yeah.
And as they have all these like like I mean, you'll probably find like lists of it everywhere. There's all kind of things like Evil Dead's on there, like obviously some big classics like that, but also there's more obscure ones like Possession, which I'd
Oh,
never
wow.
seen before, like and that's a stunning movie. It's a masterpiece, and
Yeah.
there's also there's like a lot of just garbage in there as well. Like,
Yeah.
that's part of the fun too. But so I remember I watched a bunch of that a couple of years ago. But in terms of this year, and also one movie that I discovered that was on the Video Nasties list, which I really love, is a movie called Dead and Buried. It's on Shudder right now, and I think it's a proper one of them. Well, I think Trevor Henderson, who's an artist, like who I was one of my go-tos on Twitter for like movie recommendations, called it the most slept-on horror movie ever
Oh,
made.
wow.
And I think he might have a point. Came out like 1981, 1982. It's by the screenwriters of Alien, and essentially it's like, the way I try and explain it is, it's like somebody in the 1980s said, okay, we're going to try and do a modern update of like zombies if Romero had never made the Night of the Living Dead movies. So essentially it's like a modern take on like the pre-Romero zombie of like, something resurrected, and it's super creepy, and the deaths are like really nasty. It's got a real
Oh,
mean streak
wow.
to it. So I definitely recommend checking that out. In terms of like what I've watched this year, like I've not had so much of like a tight theme. It's mainly been kind of like unseen movies I haven't seen. So like I've watched like stuff like Phantasm, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, My Bloody Valentine, The Mutilator, Lady in White, like movies I've wanted to see but I've never seen before. With varying levels of success. Like I thought I wasn't so keen on like The Mutilator, but I thought that Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 was a treat. So like so yeah, like that's been fun. In terms of like stuff I've rewatched. Like I rewatched a couple of movies I haven't seen in ages. Like I rewatched The Exorcist 3, which I think is genuinely
Pretty
excellent.
good.
And I also, if that movie wasn't called The Exorcist 3, we'd be talking about it's one of the masterpieces of the 90s. But because it's The Exorcist 3, a lot of folk went, "Oh, no thanks." But it's genuinely like an excellent movie. And I also rewatched another gem from the 1990s recently, Tales from the Crypt, Demon Knight, which I saw I saw that when I was a kid. I hired it at the video shop, and it would have been about maybe couldn't have been older than 10 when I watched it, and like scared me and delighted me, and it blew my mind. And I was like, "This is an amazing movie. This is a masterpiece." But I never watched it again after that because I thought, "Oh, it's a 90s Tales from the Crypt movie. It's probably sucks." I didn't want to spoil my memory of it, but I just rewatched it a couple of weeks ago, and I thought, it's actually still great. If anything, like it's even better now when you realise what a stacked ensemble cast of character actors are in it, like William Sandler and CCH Pounder and Thomas Hayden Church and Billy Zane, like is just amazing in it. Like, it's like a super. Again, it's similar to what I said about Exorcist 3, where if it didn't have Tales from the Crypt Presents in front of it, a lot of folk might have taken it more seriously because it came out like 1995. It's kind of like just before the horror genre changed with Scream to be more kind of self-aware and kind of more, so it's like proper like old school like sets like built and things like this and like practical effects and gloopy but it's also like super funny as well, like that kind of Tales from the Crypt humor in it. And like it's such a good movie. I think it's available super cheap, like on iTunes and stuff now. Like pick it up if you're looking for like a lost gem from that decade. Check it out.
Yeah, I've actually never watched any of the Tales of the Crypt ever. My wife did.
Yeah, she go watch all that as well. Let's get into that treat.
Funny you mentioned Exorcist 3 because I always say that to people as you should watch this movie. Kind of like I don't know if you've seen Psycho 2. People, it's not as good as Psycho 1, but it's such a different, interesting movie.
Well, I've literally not seen. It's been over 20 years since I've seen Psycho 2, so I can't really remember anything about it other than the fact that I watched it and thought this is really good and it's a lot better than people give it credit for. So I can't really tell you much in detail, but that was my impression of it at the time. And what I know of the story, which I don't want to spoil for anyone who's not seen it, it's actually really cleverly done the way they kind of play the story.
Yeah.
But in terms of Exorcist 3, like you could write a whole essay, like you could do a whole video essay on like that one scene, the jump scare, which is the best executed jump scare maybe in all of cinema because it shouldn't work, but it's so well done.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed Exorcist 3. Exorcist 2, not so much, but Exorcist 3,
I've never seen Exorcist 2.
It's horrible. Exorcist 3, good. And we just watched what was it? It was an older movie, and we were well, you mentioned Texas Chainsaw. We watched Texas Chainsaw 2. I really liked it. I thought it was so absurd and funny. My wife hated it. And then we watched 3, and I thought as a slasher it was fine, but it definitely felt like it didn't have the heart of that.
I think Texas Chainsaw 2, I think that I can see why a lot of folk wouldn't like it. I can see why your wife didn't like it because it's a kind of an acquired taste. You can see if a lot of people were expecting like part 1, maybe they were disappointed, but obviously told people knew that you couldn't do the same as that again. It had to be totally different. I think one of the best descriptions I saw of Texas Chainsaw 2, I read a review of it that said, if the first film is like an embellished account of something that actually happened, you can imagine it's like, this is presented in a way it's like this actually happened to somebody, then like someone's friend that knew somebody, like they went through it, it's given a slightly embellished account of it. That's what the first movie's like. The second movie's like some sleazy con man heard about it, put like a running stage show, like production of it,
I'm always amazed that it's the same director. I think he just wanted to go off the walls. I think that's what he even said. He didn't want to repeat the same movie.
Why would you want to? And I think that's what makes it so charming because in certain ways the core remains intact, but like the presentation is just so different and so baroque and so just nuts. It's I just think it's so much fun.
Yeah, I agree. That one really surprised me. And then we just saw Halloween Kills. I don't want to spoil any because it just came out.
I've not seen it yet, but I'm curious to check it out because I liked the last Halloween in 2018.
Me too. So. Yeah, 2018 really surprised me. I really enjoyed it. I even saw it in theaters twice. I never do that, but this one interesting. I'll say that I didn't hate it or anything, but I can see why the fan base is so divided. And now we're watching Midnight Mass, which I don't know if you've seen.
So good.
where we just finished episode 4. I'm not gonna spoil, but oh my god, the ending. I was just like blown away at that episode.
Yeah, it's such a good series. It just gets better and better. Like, you know, I mean, I remember like, you know, like when I first started watching it, like, you know, I was thinking, there's a lot more mass than midnight in here, you know.
That's what my wife said. She's like, what is all this religion stuff? I'm like, I just wait. I give this guy benefit.
But
he
also,
always
I
makes
think the religion stuff is handled like really well. Like, you know, like, and I think in the way, like, obviously without spoiling, if anybody doesn't know anything about it, it's a perfect fit for the kind of story, like, you know, they're telling, like, you know, and like, you know, and I think like, you know, you really, you know, whatever, like, you know, your stance is, like, you know, whatever your beliefs are, I think every character feels like real and realized and sympathetic in what they believe or don't believe, like, you know, and like, you know, and everyone's like stance is an extension of who they are. The character writing is just like top notch. Like, you know, it's I kind of feel like Mike Flanagan, like, is for me, I think whether it's comics or movies or TV, it's super satisfying when you follow a creator like for many years. Like, I feel I've been following Mike Flanagan, and you've seen them kind of like, you know, reaching at something, like, you know, and they're doing good work and interesting work. Then they finally hit that thing that it feels like they've been grasping at for years, and that's what kind of feels like this Midnight Mass is. You know, him doing like what he's been trying to do for however long. Like, and it's super satisfying. It's really well done, and keep on watching because it pays off beautifully in the back.
Yeah, I mean, we watched it mostly because Mike Flanagan's on there, like his name is on there. So I was like, everything we watched, even Oculus, like you said when he started, I like, but I didn't love. This feels like this is what he wanted to make for like 10 years, and he had to do all that to get here.
It's so many of the same themes that he's had in earlier stuff, but just kind of remixed to just the right balance here. Like, you know, it's just so well done.
Yeah, so and then we're gonna try to rewatch Scream because my wife has a channel on horror and she's wanting to do a ranking, and she's like, wow, I don't really remember 3 and 4. And so we're excited. I mean, I've watched them so many times.
I love Scream, and I rewatched them recently. Like, the first Scream is one of my all-time favorite movies. When I was at a time when I was a kid and I first saw the movie when it was new, like, it was a few years, like, that's my favorite movie, like, you know, and I've rewatched it so often and studied it so much, you know, that even now, like, I probably could tell you everything that happens in that movie off by heart. Scream 2, like, I think is still a great sequel. Like, you know, obviously it's not as good as the first one, but like, you know, it's a lot of fun. Like, and I think it gains a lot, like, you know, or it wins a lot of goodwill through the virtue of, you can maybe overlook how it's a bit rushed and the plot doesn't hold together because the characters, like, you're so invested in the characters, like, you know, and you like them and you learn more about them. Like, you know, 3, I didn't like. That's the only one in the series that's kind of a dud for me. I kind of feel that it feels like part 1 and 2 have such well-realized characters and you care what's happening. Part 3, they all feel like, you know, stock characters. They're, you know, apart from the kind of returning central 3, you know, who you care about. The rest of them are kind of just like spit figures. But it kind of could have maybe coasted by. But in hindsight, like, it being a Weinstein production about, like, you know, actresses who are like sleeping with directors to kind of get ahead, and just has this kind of like easy, like, you know,
too real now.
And like, you know, and then like, but then having said that, I didn't like it when it first came out, but rewatching it, I think Scream 4 is actually the best one since the original. I think it's super well done. The kind of set pieces are really excellently handled. The cast is great. It's actually maybe my favorite killer in the series, without spoiling it for anybody who's like not seen it. It is
clever.
Yeah, and like, you know, and I think like it's for being like Wes Craven's like last movie before he passed away. I think it's a lovely swan song for like his career in terms of the themes it covers and all that. So yeah, it's definitely put me in the mind that as far as like hit rate, like Scream's actually a really solid, like, you know, as far as horror franchises go. So I'm keen to see what happens in the next one.
Yeah, Scream 4, I've always enjoyed, and I like the twist, and I also like that was really a commentary on reboots because there were so many reboots in those years. It was great. She doesn't remember because she only seen it once, so she's excited, and so she did a video about like the most who made the most money in the theater, and surprisingly, Scream with 4 movies almost makes as much as all 12 Halloween and all 12 Friday the 13th. I'm just sitting there like, 4 movies and almost made as much. That's a big hit, especially international. I was so surprised. But yeah, we're excited to rewatch that, and I'm sure you see the trailer. Scream 5 looks absolutely.
Oh yeah, no, I've watched that trailer multiple times. Like, you get it in my veins right away.
Oh, it's so good. I love the text.
I've been decorating for Halloween, like, you know, and I've got this big life-size like mannequin just set up here.
I put that in the window. Scared me. No, we were talking about the other day, my wife and I and my friend, and we're just like, where are the slashers? Like, I really miss the slasher like icons. Like Scream to me was, I mean, you could say Pennywise maybe, but it's been a long time since I had a icon as big as like Ghostface. And we were doing a video, and she's like, "Yeah, Ghostface to me, Pennywise is great, but he's more of a fear thing, whereas these guys actually murdered you, like they chased you." And I really hope one day we get kind of back into. I know all these Halloween now and everything's back, but I want a new slasher for this generation now. But yeah, anyway, so we talked so much about all the fun.
I know, yeah, I could happily just sit and talk for another hour.
I really could. I love horror movies. So, but before we go too far, I do have a really, this is another fun question because you're now in your work. Like you said, you work for IDW now. AWA is, I have all their books. I love their stuff. They're getting up there. So this is like the time where probably, you know, Marvel or DC is probably like, oh, this guy can write pretty good. Do you want to write for us? So if you had a chance, if DC or Marvel was like, hey, would you like to write, what character or teams or anything like that, what would you, who and what team maybe would you want to write for, or which character?
Now, I'm sorry, this is like the basic bitch answer, but I'd always like, I usually go for like, Batman / Spider-Man, like, Batman for DC, Spider-Man for Marvel, purely because those are the two characters where when I was a little kid, like really young, Batman was my first superhero, like, and I, bought like all the animated series toys, and I watched all the movies and all that, and like, and obviously Spider-Man was my kind of like gateway drug into the Marvel universe. Like, I remember like one year, like my mum bought me for Christmas this big Marvel guidebook because I had a picture of Spider-Man in the front. I loved Spider-Man, and that opened me up to the whole Marvel universe and got me into, so they're kind of like my two gateways to the respective universes. I think it'd be a really lovely story to be able to say, like, oh, I wrote a story for those characters that meant so much to me and kind of got me into comics and kind of going full circle almost. I don't know if I'd want to do it, at least at this stage, I don't know if I'd want to do like, a big full run on those characters. I think almost there'd be more freedom in like, doing like a little out of continuity, or at least like, outside of the main book, like mini series or something like this, like, that was had, more control over, and I could do more of my own thing on. Do kind of like my twist on like this character or that quality character. Like, I think like, it'd be fun to do like, like a Batman comic with like Ian Laurie, or a Spider-Man comic with Alex Cormack, like, and do like something that's like, our type of thing. So yeah, that'd probably be like, my answer. But obviously there's a few characters in there that like, I've had ideas that I'd love to play with, like, Daredevil or like Swamp Thing or whatever. Like, Swamp Thing's like a big horror icon. Obviously, but I love horror comics. You can't love horror comics and not have some kind of relationship to Swamp Thing. So yeah, like, I've got a few answers in there, but yeah, probably obviously, after like, as much as like to say I'm a sophisticated chap, like, I think I'm as geeking out about like the Batman trailer as anybody else.
Yeah, it's a good trailer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I when I wrote down, and because reading your work and enjoying it, like characters I can visualize that you would actually fit a story. Obviously, Swamp Thing, like you said, that's an easy one because of the horror roots. But I don't know if you read them. I don't really read them, but I would love to read a good story about Man Thing, and that's also horror roots. I feel like, I don't know what Marvel's like missing it on the mark, because I feel he can be really interesting. But one, I don't know if you read much of them. Animal Man. I'm a big
I've
fan.
not been reading much modern Animal. I think the last Animal Man I read was like the Jeff Lemire run, like, in 2011, like, a Travel Foreman, like, back in New 52. But obviously I've read like the Grant Morrison run. That's like one of my, favorite comics, Grant Morrison, like, Scottish comics icon. So
well, because the only reason I say Animal Man is because when I read your work, besides the horror stuff, I feel like your dialogue is your strongest part when you're writing. And Animal Man, when I read Jeff Lemire's run, it wasn't that the story was grand, it was that the family and the dialogue was so well done. I could see you kind of focusing on the family aspect and making the dialogue realistic, especially after I read Mountainhead. I wish, like, my one problem with the comic was I wish it was longer, because I'm like, such good dynamic, and no, don't end it at issue 5. I can go another couple issues. So things like that, I really could see you do something like Animal Man, like a 10-issue miniseries.
I think it would be fun. I think that one of the things that's a big appeal about, like, doing like, a Marvel or DC book is that idea of, like, providing like, you know, you're selling well, like, you know, and the audience is interested, that you're able to kind of like strap in and go, okay, let's plan for like, you know, a 12 issue run
Yeah.
or whatever, like, you know, without being like such strict limitations of it's a mini series. So like, you know, it's 6 issues, 5 issues, 4 issues, you know. I love that idea of having time to let things kind of play out, you know, at more leisurely pace, and have like long-term things bubbling in the background.
Yeah, no, I just when I thought of it, I'm like, man, he would do good on that, especially after in Mountainhead. I was like, wow, I would just like to see that kind of family dynamic. So talking about Mountainhead, that is that your newest work, or would Hotel be newer? I got them both around the same time.
It's a funny one, I think, because Mountainhead launched first. That kind of launched in single issues back in like 2019, but then there was some delays on it. And then just when it was coming back again, it was hit by the pandemic, so it can get pushed back for a while. But the way it worked out, because of those delays, Hotel launched early 2020 and finished, and the collection of Hotel came out before the collection of Mountainhead.
Okay.
And a lot of folk, because you know, discovered Mountainhead with the collection, so it seems like Mountainhead came out after Hotel. So it's like a weird kind of, but like there's a kind of like, you know, around the same time ish.
Yeah, because when I read them, it was around the same time and very different feel, which was actually nice because I have a lot of favorite writers, but sometimes they get stuck in that kind of they're writing the same story but remixing the characters. When I read Mountainhead, I was like, "Whoa, this is way out there, way more action." The ending is insanity, and the artist, I'm sorry, I forgot the name. He did
Ryan Lee.
My God, that ending! I'm not gonna spoil what happens,
Yeah.
but it was insane. So
I'm quite fun. I'm quite like proud of the creative team of Mountainhead. It's John Lees, Ryan Lee, Sean Lee, and colorist Doug Garbach. You know, so it's like, you know, I was like, can you change your name to like Lee?
All the Lee. No, really, it really blew me away. And so with that one, Mountainhead was that self-contained story. So you have, I'm sure you have some new projects coming out. I know I saw one about wrestling, which is so funny because I don't watch wrestling anymore, but I used to as a kid a lot in early teens. But I love like wrestling stories. Does that make sense? I don't like watching it, but like I love the wrestler and I love the background of it, like the characters usually in a wrestling. I just don't really watch wrestling anymore. So when you announced it, I'm like, well, there we go, another one I'm gonna have to buy. But
I'm really excited about the Crimson Cage because that's the series. It's called the Crimson Cage. The kind of premise of that is, well, first off, it's me reuniting with my Cinco creator Alex Cormack to do a new story. And it is a retelling of William Shakespeare's Macbeth set against the backdrop of like the 1980s, like Southern pro wrestling territories. And it's been so much fun to work on. Like I, you know, love wrestling. Like I've been a wrestling fan since like probably about as long as I've been a comic fan, like going back to like a young kid. And I remember way back in the earliest days of my comic career, like, you know, back when I first did the Standard, I had the idea I'd love to do a wrestling comic. And specifically, even though it was a little bit before my time in terms of like being a fan, I just loved the kind of vibe of like the early 1980s, like, you know, that whole world of the territories and the kind of characters that are existing in that world. I thought it was an interesting kind of backdrop of American history to kind of put a story in. But I didn't really have a story yet, so I kind of went in the back burner. And then independently of that, I remember it was around the time I'd seen Justin Cazale's like Macbeth with Michael Fassbender in it.
Yeah.
And I thought it was great. And then shortly afterwards, I watched like Akira Kurosawa's Throne of Blood, which is now one of my favorite movies. I've rewatched it so many times. And I thought, oh, Macbeth's such a great story. I loved Macbeth in school. And I thought, I love like these takes on it. And I wonder like what I would do. And I loved like how Throne of Blood was like retelling it with samurai. And I was like, I wonder how I would retell Macbeth. And then that kind of dormant wrestling idea kind of came up. And I went, hang on a minute. And I realized how neatly these two worlds fit together, like and how, you know, well, like, you know, if you swap out like, you know, Macbeth being the ambitious soldier, like, you know, who's presented with an opportunity when like the king comes to stay at his castle, if that then becomes Chuck Frenzy, who's the name of our main character, is a main event player of this small Louisiana territory, like a big fish in a small pond, who wants more out of his career. And the world champion, this is back in the days, like when the world champion, like the NWA world champion, and ours is the GWA, but back in the day, the world champion wouldn't just be in one federation. He'd travel from territory to territory all around the country, like defend, working a few dates in a territory and then moving on to the next place. So rather than the king coming to stay at Best Castle, it's like the champion coming to like work in his territory. And it's like, what happens when like he has a chance to kind of like seize his moment of glory. And thing I don't want to spoil a 400-year-old story, but like I can tell you that things don't like pan out very well. And so it's been such a fun, like, kind of blending of these two different worlds, which are actually quite complementary in a lot of ways, because like I think that wrestling has a lot in common with theatre, and especially when you look back in like the olden days of like the traditions of the Globe Theatre and shit, because I studied Shakespeare in school, and it had a lot more in common with like a pro wrestling show than like what we think of as theatre now, because like it was like because normally back in the days, like in like the 1600s, when you went to the Globe Theatre when Shakespeare was alive, it was like, in London, you'd cross the bridge over the Thames into like the seedy part of town, all the brothels and the dive bars, like the illegal fights and this stuff. And the centre of all was the Globe Theatre. And it wasn't like a proscenium arch stage, which we think of like, as it was actually this curtain. And then you walked out the curtain, the actors walked out the curtain down a ramp into this big square, which was then surrounded by the audience, and the audience were all kind of rowdy and drunk and like cheering their favourites and booing the villains and stuff. So you had to kind of like have these big physical performances to kind of be seen, essentially like wrestling, like, and even like in the comic, like when we do like the Shakespearean monologues, it's just like soliloquies, an equivalent of that is wrestlers cut a promo. They're in front of a curtain and they have a microphone and they talk directly to the reader, like they're cutting a promo, and like, it's a real fun kind of like, blending those two like worlds together. And like, it's a story I've been so passionate about for such a long time. It's like a dream comic of mine, and I'm so happy that AWA are letting me do it, and I'm so happy I'm working with the team I'm working with. Alex Cormack is an amazing artist. He's the guy who I automatically think of, like, whenever I think of an idea, I imagine it drawn by Alex. And it's his wife, Ashley Cormack, who's coloring it, who's like the ideal partner for him. She really brings out the best in his work. And it's Hassan Otsmanelhau, who's the letterer, who I've been a big fan of for years, both for his lettering and it's just his comics mind whenever he writes about comics, and like, sort of what do you call it, Strip Panel Naked, his YouTube series, or Panel by Panel is a magazine. He's like a great kind of comics mind, a great storytelling mind, so it's great to have him on board as well. And yeah, it's a really cool comic. I say it's available for pre-order now. You can go to your local comic shop and let them know you add it to your pro list, and it'll be out December 8th. But also, I've actually got, the weird thing is that after ages not having anything new, I've got 2 books coming out in the direct market like at the same time, because I've got Hotell Volume 2 coming out, and that's launching at 1 week before Crimson Cage. That's coming out December 1st, and again, that's also available for pre-order now, so you can let your local comic shop know about it. And if you liked Volume 1, this one is not just a repetition of the same thing. It's not like, oh, another weekend of an eclipse, like something happened, It's like the story's bigger scale. We get to get more into like the kind of depths of the hotel and like, what's going on there, and like you learn more about the characters. There's more emotional stakes at play. I'm really proud of the stories we've put together for this, and it's been so much fun getting to know Dalibor Talic, the artist, who, like, when I first wrote the first volume, like, I wrote the scripts before I really knew him. But then I met Dalibor at New York Comic Con 2019 before the world ended, and we really hit it off. And so it was so good to be able to kind of message him and say, like, Dalibor, like, what do you want to draw? What would interest you? And get into that with him a bit. So I kind of feel like this volume is more collaborative in that sense. So yeah, like if you like Volume 1, I think you'll love Volume 2.
Yeah, and I mean, that's 2 works from AWA. You already did one with it. Is AWA kind of like the publisher you're really on good terms with? Because I feel like there's only like one other writer who has a second work with AWA besides you, and I'm like, that's awesome, because I really like most of their work.
Yeah, no, I think like AWA has been great to work with. I love the whole team over there. Like, they have a great editorial staff.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, like it's been, I think because we were all really happy with how Hotell did. Like, I think obviously everybody has like high hopes for a comic, like, when it comes out. I think we were all kind of taken aback just by how much Hotell resonated with people. Like, I think it was Hotell's second highest selling book behind The Resistance.
That's awesome.
Yeah, for me, like, I think when you look at the kind of roster, like, of talent in their various books, at least in the writer side of things, I know Dalibor and Lee Lowridge and Sal Cipriano all have like credits, like, in Marvel and DC and etc. But in terms of like the writers, I was probably the least established writer of any of like them, like,
The
so I
first
think it was kind of was a pleasant surprise. Like, I'm definitely no Jamaica Zazinski, but I think that, like, you know, it's a pleasant surprise. So I'm thinking, oh, well, this, maybe there's, you know, folk like this weird Scottish guy, so see what else he's got. But yeah, no, like, so it's been fun having more things with them. We've been obviously talking about maybe doing more stuff, you know, in future, like, as well, like, you know, so it's good to have that communication and open. But I'm talking with other publishers too. Like, I've got, like, I can't really, nothing I can talk about, but I'm talking with a couple of other publishers about various projects, which are varying from, like, the pitching stage through to, yes, let's do this, and we'll just kind of put together the deal and get it all sorted. So, like, you know, hopefully there'll be things from a range of publishers coming in, like, you know, and announcements in the coming, like, months and years, or however long it takes to come together. But I'm still working with Comics Tribe as well. Like, I know folk have been at, one of the things that's made me really happy is that even with all these cool announcements with the Crimson Cage and Hotell, folk have still kept on asking, well, where's Sync? We were getting more Sync. It's been a longer gap than I would have wanted to have for Sync, but it's not really been in our control. The plan had originally been to take a year off of Sync, and we were going to do the Crimson Cage in 2020, then come back for Sync Volume 3 in 2021. However, then the pandemic happened, and, like, Crimson Cage was put on hold for a year, but wasn't just, like, on hold. It was kind of like, while they were waiting to see, like, how things are panning out, like, what the future was going to be, it was like, we could any minute now, like, tell you to start work, so we couldn't start anything else. We're kind of, like, just waiting for months to, like, you know, start getting engaged. So that kind of put back the timeline a little bit. So we're kind of like, Alex is just finishing that off now, and then we're going into more Sync. I'm not sure if you've seen, like, on social media, but we have started promoting that the Kickstarter is going to be launching very soon for Dig, which is, the idea is that it's been a little time away from Sync, you know, for the first 2 volumes. We're going to kind of come right back in with a bang, with a kind of big bumper self-contained story, 64 pages, a kind of OGN.
Nice.
It's all about, it's called Dig, and it's all about Mr. Dig, the kind of fox mask wearing, shovel wielding vigilante that haunts the streets of Zinc Hill. It's going into his, like, and because it's not a Sync comic, it's not Sync 11, it's like, you know, because it's its own thing, it's Dig, we get to kind of play outside the kind of format we usually have for, like, Sync. So there's not all set in Sync Hill. It's kind of a bit of globetrotting stuff. It's just some flashback stuff, but there's, like, lots of things that I don't normally do in Sync that I'm doing in this. Which is, like, it's our biggest story yet in terms of, like, scale, in terms of, like, the level of action and display. And right after that, hopefully, once that comes out, we're immediately launching into Sync Volume 3 in 2022. So there is more Sync coming as well.
Oh, awesome. I'm so excited for more Sync. I mean, I've already read Sync 1 like 4 times and Sync 2 twice, and it's definitely one of those ones I like to pick up and reread, and I catch things that I didn't catch the first time. So I'm definitely gonna be following that Kickstarter and supporting that.
Thank you very much.
No problem. And you said you had, I'm sorry, you mentioned earlier you had a superhero one coming out.
Oh no, I'd said, like, way back in the day, like, I did a superhero comic. Like, this was my first ever comic, was called The Standard, which came out, well, I first started working on it in, like, late, I first started writing in late 2008. I started working on it, like, 2009. And I think we originally started, like, selling it, like, at conventions and things, like, 2011, and it finally got a direct market release, like, 2013. That was, like, my first book, like, you know, that I ever did. It took me years to get it made. I was kind of learning how to make comics over the process of, like, making that book. And it's still a comic I'm proud of, and I'm, like, back, there's a lot I still like about it. Yeah, that was a lot of fun to work on, like, you know, and I've not really done much superhero stuff since, but even if I don't get to do any more superhero stuff, like, I kind of feel I put everything that I love about superheroes into that book. So I think it's a bit hard to find these days, but if you can hunt it down,
I'll try to find it. I mean, I think I own everything that you've put out since Sync, I'm pretty sure, but that's so awesome. You have stuff coming. I love to hear that it's keep coming. And with Hotell 2, I'm super excited that, but I'm actually might be slightly more excited for the wrestling because it's new, and I always like the new stuff that a writer comes up with. So wow, that's 3 works pretty much coming out pretty soon. Or at least
I like, you know,
in December.
That's been a lot of, like, it's kind of been a lot of, like, I kind of feel when you're not got new stuff to promote, and obviously you can't talk about stuff until it's officially announced, but you've not got new stuff to promote, right? And you're seeing other people announcing stuff. It kind of feels like, do I really exist if I don't have new books? So it feels really good that in 2022, because, like, these books are both launching in December, and then, like, the big Kickstarter to launch before the end of the year. But in terms of like when the bulk of the series are coming out, and then like when Dig's coming out in sync, 2022, like I'm going to have like, you know, at least 3 series running,
That's
like, you
awesome.
know, maybe a 4th, depending how things pan out. Like we don't know yet, like, but you know, that might get pushed back down the line. But yeah, like, you know, like, so it's going to be my biggest, you know, most jam-packed year of books I've ever had. So after a lot of activity, it feels like it's all paying off now, and it's going to be a lot of me coming like soon.
Well, that's awesome. And just I'm curious if you're allowed to say, would Hotel then be your most successful, or at least get your name out the most? It seems.
I think it's difficult to judge. I think there's definitely been degrees. Like I think, like, you know, and Emily Was Gone was like one book in terms of like that was a big thing in terms of getting me visible, and like that was the book that like made a lot of creators, like, you know, and publishers go, oh, you're the guy who did this. And then Sync was another level on top of that in terms of like that was like the biggest selling book at the time, and that got a lot of outreach. And Sync was a book that really got a lot of attention of editors, like, you know, who are like, you know, like Axel Alonso from AWA. He reached out to me because he said I read Sync and it was great, like, you know, so that was a kind of big book. And then Hotel was the next step up again, I think, in terms of the outreach the AWA's had with like retailers and stuff. And like as a whole lot of like new, and one of the things that I've really enjoyed is that it seems like when you see on Twitter and stuff like that, there's a whole bunch of readers who like Hotel was the first thing of mine that they read, and they've then gone back and, you know, got into like Sync, you know, or get into like Mountainhead, or Emily Was Gone, like, you know. So that's the great thing, that even as like bigger and bigger books come out, the old stuff's still there to kind of go back and get found. So hopefully that continues.
Yeah, when I went to my comic shop, and I had Hotel on my pull list, she was like, "Oh, what's it about?" When the first issue, and she said me and one other person. I was like, so I told her it's a kind of anthology series and everything, and she said, "Huh?" And so she ordered an extra one next week, to put up on the wall, and she said every week new reader would buy it, and I was like, it's because horror has that kind of effect where people give it more of a chance than a superhero or another sci-fi series. Which, don't get me wrong, I love sci-fi, but there's one more comic that's sci-fi on the stand. But horror is different. You don't really see, and like you said, it's kind of hard to put it on page, and get people's attention to keep reading, because you can, like you said, just shut the book and be like,
I think horror's really like booming now though, like in terms of comics, because there was a certain point where like I was like rah horror comics, like to support horror. So I tried to buy like every horror comic that came out just to support horror comics. But there's so many of them now that you can't keep track of them, which goes to show you, like, you know, like that's sort of taken off as that, like, you know, a genre. But I do think it's interesting you say that in terms of the limitation, you can just close the book, like, you know, and that's the kind of trick you have to try, like, and trick people into thinking they can't close the book, you know, or they have to keep on going. As a
I'm sorry, I was gonna say, I think it's because the characters, for me, when I read a horror, if I get connected to characters where I'm like, oh, don't die, then I keep reading. Because like you
I
said,
think that's the case for like horror in all mediums, though. I think like the secret is having characters you like. And we were talking about Scream earlier on, like, and how successful Scream is. I think that's why Scream did well when so many other slashers didn't, because you care so much about the characters. Like, you know, you're genuinely upset when redacted gets killed, like, you know, like, you know, so I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah, and it's another thing I found fascinating when watching like a retrospect about Halloween, is they said it's not Michael Myers that people want in Halloween. It's oh my god, Laurie Strode. She's all the movies with her in it are successful, and all
And
the
then the
movies
ones when it's like other people or like, you know, it's random character, because when it's just something, it's just like some, like, for me, what makes Michael Myers a character is it's Dr. Loomis chasing him, or it's like Laurie Strode, like, you know, trying to go about her life and this, you know, like demon hunting her. If you take that out of the equation, it's just like random people that he's killing. That's not a story. That's just like, you know, spectacle.
Yeah.
So I think like, you have to have that emotional tether to make people care. And like I've always said this, like for me, I think and more when I watch Halloween, like on repeat every year, like I do, like it's the best part of that movie is like the daytime stuff, like, you know, before he starts killing, like, you know, because that's like, you know, when you really get that kind of emotional hook. And I think you mentioned Stephen King before when you're talking about, or when you're talking about like Sync, and he's great for that as well. Where like the horror, there's horror, but what makes the horror is that you're invested in the characters. So like whether it's horror or any genre, like, you know, it's going to be empty unless there's characters you like and care about in there.
Yeah, and it's you know, reading Sync. I haven't read Sync, the first one, in about a year, but I still remember the characters the most, and I think that's important. So to kind of wrap it up, you have a lot for people to read who've never read your stuff, and you can
Yeah.
pretty much get it all. I know
You
Comics
can
Tribe.
definitely get it on Comixology. If you search for my name, or if you search for Comics Tribe or AWA or any of the titles, you'll find them on Comixology. Some of them, like most of them, you can probably still get. Like I think you can get Hotell and Mountainhead on Amazon. When you get to, like the Sync and stuff like that, like Sync's getting a new printing, coming up with a new volume, so it'll be
Oh,
easier to get
awesome.
after that. But like right now, it may be a bit more difficult. Maybe have to go on eBay to pick it up, But as I say, if you don't mind reading digitally, you can get it on Comixology.
Awesome. And so you guys definitely, you can even see I've put it on my best of the year that year for Sync, and obviously I really enjoyed it. And if you don't believe me, you can go on Goodreads because all his stuff has high ratings. So I'm not the only one. But I can't thank you enough for coming on the show, sharing your horror experiences, both movie and comics. And I hope you guys, I know you guys, a lot of times my favorite comments I get from you guys, thank you for telling me about these comics because I would have never read them. And you got about 6 comics I think we named here that you could now go pick up for October, which is they're all horror, right? Yeah, all of them. Yeah, even Mountainhead's pretty
Yeah, I
horror.
think that's kind of funny. Yeah.
And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. And John Lees, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was a pleasure to interview.
Thanks so much for having me. Like it's really, it was fun chatting with you. Like, as a second half, we just like talk horror all night. So yeah, like I said, thanks for kind of like shedding a little bit of light on some of my old books and stuff. And like, talking I'm glad folk are still discovering them and still reading them. And like I say, like, Hotel Volume 2, The Crimson Cage, both available for pre-order now. So get to your comic shop and let them know you want them. They're out in December. I'm trying to think what else I can do to plug myself. You can find me on Twitter at JohnLees927. You can find me on Patreon, patreon.com/JohnLees. Or you can sign up to my weekly newsletter at deepender.johnleescomics.com. That's deep-ender.johnleescomics.com. I think that's everything.
Awesome. Yes, follow him on Twitter. I love to read your stuff about when you were reading Monster. It made me actually go reread it because I was like, oh no, I got to reread that series. It's been 15 years. But thank you guys again for watching. Go check out stuff. I'll put some links in the description so you can just click it and go and buy it. And get scared for Halloween. Come on, we got 14 days, 13 days.
Everyone's
I don't know. It's
the one good scare.
Yes, there you go.